what advice would you give?
You know what I'd say, and it might seem oversimplified, but it's profound. I'd say shh.
First off, I want to say that I'm not attacking you with this title. This video is not meant to come off like you did something wrong and now you have social anxiety. Rather, this video is meant to narrate how we got here, to a point where interacting with people makes us anxious. Social anxiety affects so many people on different levels, and I'm not saying every story is the same. However, looking at my own experience with social anxiety, I have identified a chain of events that has led me here, which I will present in this video. Although I have definitely not fully overcome this yet, I still believe that I have something to offer that might help if social anxiety is a losing battle for you right now. While I usually offer little pieces of advice in each section of my videos, this one will be different. I will focus entirely on the narrative aspect, and instead dedicate my next video to tips on combating social anxiety. I would love to hear any thoughts or stories that you have in the comments below. We're also trying to learn and grow, and it's easier if we talk together. With that said, let's get started. Naturally, I will start this story at the beginning, because there is a lot to be learned by observing where we used to be. Let me remind you of a time long ago when you probably didn't even know that social anxiety existed, let alone what it meant. Yes, I'm talking about the tender ages of 5 to 12. This was a time when boys didn't like girls and your only worries were trying to memorize the words for the spelling test on Friday. Most importantly, however, was the immense amount of apathy that everyone had, and I mean that in a good way. Simply put, we didn't care about anything. We didn't worry about what clothes we were wearing, if we had a bad hair day, who we were friends with, or if we had plans in the weekend. Best of all, we didn't care about the consequences of interacting with people. In fact, we believed that there were no consequences. We never really thought about what would happen if so-and-so didn't want to be our friend. We were fearless. Unfortunately, we cannot time travel and take those feelings back to the present with us. So there is no reason to think about fully returning to that childhood mindset. I said I wasn't going to give any thorough advice in this video, but I would like to put one thought in your head. Always remember that there are never consequences for interacting with people. That is the one thing I want you to take from this look back at our early years. I will flesh this out more in the following video, but back to our story. This blissful feeling of apathy continues on for a while. For some it lasts longer than others, but unfortunately, there comes a point in all our lives when an event changes all that. Inevitable in everyone's lives, rejection is something that wipes away all of the carefree feelings we had as kids. It can come in many different types and occur in many different ways. I would say that people probably experience their first rejection between the ages of 12 to 16. Again, this moment is very different for everyone. For you, it could be when you got cut from a sports team. For another person, it could be when they got rejected after asking someone to a school dance. Take a moment right now to try and identify that moment in your life, if you have never thought about it before. I have that moment for me in my head right now, but I'm not going to share the story because it's quite long and I don't want to waste your time. However, I will obviously talk about how my first experience with rejection made me feel. Thinking back, it was such an odd feeling at first. I still remember it pretty clearly. I couldn't tell if I was happy or sad, but what I did know was that I was going into my head a lot more. I was starting to think about interacting with people a lot more than I once was. Eventually, the feeling of rejection coupled with me overthinking about social interactions created the true culprit of social anxiety within me: fear. I became scared to talk to people. I became fearful of sharing things about myself. I began overthinking every interaction until my mind reached the worst possible scenario. I began overanalyzing rejection, believing that if I was rejected, it was a rejection of my entire character. Overall, I became mortified of consequences that had developed in my head because of rejection. While we all have unique experiences with rejection, most of us end up in this state at some point. Over time, we make our social interactions less and less frequent. We will do anything to avoid the consequences. Worst of all, we usually keep this turmoil internal, never sharing what we are really going through. Eventually, we reach another state, which will transition us into the final part of this story. This is the true dark side of social anxiety. It is the phase when it becomes a subconscious feeling that stays in hibernation for a long time, then bursts with some severe fallout. As I said earlier, over time you will tend to avoid more and more social interactions. It will become a natural habit to avoid situations that would cause feelings of anxiety. Obviously, if you are doing this, you will never be able to improve and overcome it. But you will start to falsely believe that you are getting better, because the actual feelings of anxiety happen less frequently. It is this mind trick that places you in the final and most destructive phase, suppression. While your social anxiety might be far away for a long period of time, as I said, it will burst eventually, and these moments of explosion will feel worse than your first experience with rejection. My first experience of this came during my junior year. The night before going on an overnight school trip, I freaked out and felt a huge wave of anxiety. It transferred over into the next day, and it caused me to forego the trip on that date. Before that, I had rarely been interacting with my classmates beyond any basic school scenarios. The thought of going on an intimate 2-day trip with my peers destroyed me. While I did eventually go on this trip months later, I did not fully realize what had happened, like I do now, and I continued on in this phase of suppression. This has happened again, but I don't want to make this video too long, so I won't go into details. However, the experiences were the same. You might be able to run for a long time, but eventually life will catch up and sucker punch you back into reality. As a result, you will realize that your social anxiety never disappeared. It was always lurking in the background. And now it's here at full force. There are two options. You can either start running again and retreat back to believing you got better, or you can let this slap in the face serve as a wake-up call that you must acknowledge your social anxiety and face it. That's what I'm trying to do today.
And it kind of started to shift on me. It started to feel like maybe the thing you're most scared of is exactly what you should do. Maybe this is actually what you should push yourself into.
Now that the story has concluded, it is time to talk about the specific ways we can overcome social anxiety, which I will do in the next video. But before I go, I want to remind you that the first step towards overcoming any problem is coming to terms with the fact that you have it. Social anxiety is no exception. The first step to beating social anxiety and becoming comfortable around people is accepting that it is something you have to stop hiding from. Say it out loud, write it down 10 times, anything to become more comfortable with the problem. Then you can begin taking the steps up to improvement. That is going to do it for now on this discussion. If you enjoyed, please leave a like, and again, if you have any thoughts or stories that you want to share, don't hesitate to put them in the comments. Also, consider subscribing if you want to be part of the community and stay up to date with uploads. As always, this has been Dark Horse, and I will see you in the next video.